Hey, how's it going everyone? Thanks a lot for joining me. Today I'm going to be giving you a quick review of the Silent Hill 2 remake. This is a really good game and I really enjoyed it. And one of the reasons I thought that people may enjoy my take on this game is that I never actually played the original Silent Hill 2 back on the PlayStation 2. Now, I don't want to suggest that this makes my opinion any better than anybody else's, but I think it does make it different at the very least. Because when you're looking at a remake of anything, whether it be a video game or a movie, I feel that comparisons between the remake and the source material are always going to be like an inherent process in that. It's almost unavoidable. I know if you ask me my opinions on, say, Resident Evil 4 remake, for example, I would struggle to offer them to you without some point saying, well, in the original. And this allows me to look at the Silent Hill 2 remake in its own light, which obviously, like I say, gives you a different perspective on the game. And also, a lot of reviews that you may have already looked at for this game, I'm sure a lot of those people have already played the original. This is one of the most revered games of all time, especially from a storyline perspective, so I felt that people might enjoy my take on this game, so let's get into it. So I'll start with the game's combat, and when it comes to survival horror games, I don't recount an instance of playing one, then once reflecting back on my experience with it, thinking, yeah, the combat was really, really good here, and to be honest with you, Silent Hill 2 Remake is no exception to that. That being said, however, it is a significant step up from those old school survival horror games, you know, the one with the fixed cameras, the ones with the tank controls, because Silent Hill 2 Remake takes the same approach that the Resident Evil remakes have made. You now get the fully three-dimensional camera, you get the over-the-shoulder aiming, and this makes combat much more engaging, it makes it much more dynamic, because you now have agency over where your shots are going, you can miss shots, you can aim at weak spots, and it's much more fun than simply pointing a weapon at an enemy that's probably off screen and simply spamming the shoot button like you did in those old school survival horror games. The weapons in the game, they're also really fun to shoot. They pack a little bit of a punch, particularly the shotgun and the rifle. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this game's shoot mechanics and shooting enemies throughout my playthrough. The melee combat was a little bit more hit and miss for me because, like shooting the guns, swinging the weapons had some real oomph to it. You know, the feedback was really good, the controller vibration, the sound effects, the guttural noises that James would make while he was swinging the weapons made hitting things here with a lead pipe really satisfying. And even towards the end of my roughly 17 hours that I spent with this game, I still got that, you know, have some of that when I was hitting something with the lead pipe. It was really fun, and it reminded me a little bit of the melee combat in The Last of Us. You know, that very satisfying feeling of hitting something. However, I wasn't as much a fan of the game's dodge mechanic. The reason for this is, obviously this is a survival horror game, so you find yourself in a lot of narrow corridors. So you go to an enemy, and your only really direction to evade was backwards. And even when I was, you know, timing the dodges correctly, I found that I was actually out of range to follow up with an attack, and I would just end up swinging at thin air. And even in the more open environments, when I was dodging more laterally, I found that often enemies found their way behind me, and on a few occasions I was actually getting hit in the back by an enemy combo, which was really frustrating. And this is compounded by, you take some tap in this game, you take a lot of damage. I played through on standard, and you know, you get 2 hits before the screen starts to go that admittedly annoying blurry red around the outside where you have to heal. And I felt personally that the melee combat could potentially have done with a lock on here, because you sort of lose track of where enemies are, but overall the combat here was really good. So, of course, when creating a complete combat system, having fun combat mechanics themselves is only part of the equation, right? You have to have something interesting to utilise those mechanics on. And I feel in this regard, Silent Hill 2 Remake does a really good job. The enemy designs are suitably grim and gruesome. That being said, however, I did take exception to this one enemy in particular, and it's an enemy you do encounter quite frequently throughout the run, because he would sort of hide behind doors and in your blind side, and you would go through into a room and it would just jump on you from behind. And I felt there was nothing I could really do to combat these enemies, which is obviously really annoying. And while I do see what they were going for with this enemy, obviously trying to induce anxiety as you were traversing and exploring the environments, but unfortunately it just comes across as cheap. So I thought that now would be as good a time as any to talk about the radio in the game, the way it works and functions, because it is sort of tied into the combat and the enemies. So anyway, you carry a radio on you and it creates radio static when there's enemies in close proximity to James. And I felt that this was a bold inclusion to put in a horror game because it sort of betrays one of the main tenets of the genre, that being the unknown. Even just generally in life, what is unknown to us, what we don't see coming and what we don't know is there, is scary to us, right? But I feel it's a mechanic which pays off. And while I certainly don't want to suggest that it's a better way of creating suspense than the unknown, it certainly doesn't inhibit it either, knowing that enemies are present. And I just want to also mention as a footnote, if you don't feel the same way as me and you sort of feel that it sort of kills the suspense of the game, you can turn it off. So another thing that I really enjoyed about this game was its puzzles, and that's mainly down to the kind of puzzles that you find in Silent Hill 2 Remake, because the puzzles here aren't those kind of puzzles where it's like, figure out what the puzzle is, if that makes any sense. I recently played a game called Tormented Souls, which fans of Silent Hilly type games may or may not have come across, and at multiple times in my playthrough of that game, I was just wandering around, unsure of what the game actually wanted me to do. I'd get annoyed, I'd look up a guide, but even after I knew the solutions, I was left wondering what precedent the game had set for me to figure it out. That's not a problem here in Silent Hill 2 Remake, it's always blatantly obvious what the game wants you to accomplish. For example, you'll walk into a locked room, there'll be a safe in the middle of it, there'll be a riddle written on the wall, and you have to use that riddle and other things in the room to solve the code. It's that sort of thing. And I really enjoyed this because not only did it get my brain thinking, but there were multiple times throughout my playthrough I had to get the old pen and paper out, writing notes down, and it reminded me of back in the day playing the old Resident Evil games, and I really enjoyed the puzzles in this game. That being said, though, while I did really enjoy the puzzles in this game, not all of them are as compelling as others, because some of the puzzles in this game, and I do use the term puzzle loosely in this sense, amount to what is essentially a fetch quest. And I kind of get that this is not exclusive to Silent Hill, it's kind of a staple of the survival horror genre. You know the kind of thing that I mean. You'll be in a third story building, you'll find an item on the third floor which sends you down to the first floor, you'll go down to the first floor and interact with whatever it is you need to interact with, and you'll find something which sends you back up to the third floor. And if I'm being honest with you, some of these felt a little bloated, and they did test my patience, because I felt like at times the game was simply giving me the runaround. So just like I did with certain elements of the combat, I felt the environments here had their own strengths and their own weaknesses. So starting with the strengths, I felt that this remake incorporated that classic foggy look that the town of Silent Hill has really well here on current gen, because obviously back in the day, this was a product of technical limitations over any artistic license, but the remake does an amazing job of using that to create an aura, to create an atmosphere, without sacrificing any detail. And the environments here are really detailed. You'll walk through a backyard, it'll be littered with tables and chairs and different debris. And then later on in the game, when you get to the more horror-y type environments, you know, those dark and disturbing locations with all the slime in there, everything looks gruesome, everything looks disgusting. And from that standpoint, this game's environments are really impressive. So when you're tackling a game as revered as Silent Hill 2 is, it's inevitable that you're going to rub some people the wrong way. But out of everything that I've said so far, I feel this next one has the most potential to be really unpopular, because while the environments here are technically impressive, from an artistic standpoint, I honestly didn't find them all that memorable. And at the risk of turning this video into a dick measuring contest between Silent Hill and Resident Evil, there was nothing here anywhere near as iconic as the mansion from the original Resident Evil or the police station from Resident Evil 2. And then these issues are further compounded by the game dragging out certain sections far longer than they have to be, by having you going backwards and forwards through these really uninteresting areas. So okay, if you're actually still watching the video at this point after that last nugget, I'm going to talk a little bit about this game's story and characters. Now, obviously in a no spoiler review, there's not a deal I can say in this regard without spoiling it for those who haven't played the game yet, but one thing that I will say is, yeah, the story here is more than worth its reputation. It is absolutely stunning. Some of the characters are incredibly intriguing. It covers some really dark and compelling themes. And you have to consider, like I said in the intro, this is coming from someone who's only played this game once and never played the original back on PlayStation 2. So there are probably many little nuances, many little smaller details that I missed. Yet I still really enjoyed this game's story, this game's characters. It's easily the best part of the game. That being said, however, I did have one really minor nitpick in regards to the main character, James Sunderland. Now, don't get me wrong, I found him to be a really interesting character, but at times it was almost like he was self-aware he's a main character in a video game because he'll go along with all the strange tasks the game sets for him without any real good reason to do so. Now, in Resident Evil 2, having to find your way out of the police station was a really flimsy reason to get you to run around it, finding strange keys and solving really weird puzzles, but it was a reason which really isn't present in Silent Hill 2. James will go around gluing broken records together, sticking his hand in toilets and dark holes, without any indication that this will get him any closer to his main objective. And it was just really weird, and I'd be questioning, why are you doing this? So for this final part of the review, I've just taken everything I've got left in my notes, which didn't really fit into one of the categories I've already talked about, thrown it together in a miscellaneous file, and we can pretend that this part of the review has some structure to it, I guess. So anyway, earlier on in the review, I said the screen turning red to indicate how much damage you've taken was annoying, and I kind of quickly moved on from that, so I thought I'd elaborate a little bit on that here. And while, yeah, I do stand by that statement, I find this really annoying, even though it seems to crop up in every video game these days. And while, yes, you can turn this off in the options, there are no other HUD options to display your health on screen, because I guess we're all about the immersion these days. How immersive is this video game? And I guess having health displayed on screen will make it look less like a movie and more like a video game. So I felt that even though you could turn it off, I felt I had to have it turned on so I knew where I was from a health standpoint and when I needed to heal. So another small nitpick that I had with Silent Hill 2 Remake was the amount of times I walked into a locked door. Now, in my playthrough, I wanted to get the most out of it. I wanted to see as much as I could and explore as much as I could and find as much as I could. And I wanted to go in as many rooms as was available to me. Now, in this game, not all doors have any indication on them that you can actually go through them, and the only way to tell if you can is just to walk into them. And this was made even worse by Silent Hill's locations having a lot of doors in them. And bizarrely, this game actually tracks how many times you walk into a locked door. And at the end of game screen, when the stats go up, I walked into a locked door, something stupid like over 800 times. Now, if you consider that the animation lasts, let's say, 1 second every time I did it, this means that in my playthrough, I spent about 30 minutes watching James Sunderland dry hump a door that he couldn't go through, which, yeah, got quite annoying after about 700 or so-ish. Another minor detail which I thought I might bring up, because it might affect other people like it affected me. Now, I'm very fortunate. I've got like a proper gaming monitor, but I have issues with the HDR mode in certain games. When I play RE4 Remake, for example, if I turn the HDR mode on, the shadows look terrible. Everything else looks gorgeous, but the shadows are horrendous. Now, I've tinkered with the in-game settings, I've tinkered with the PlayStation settings, I've tinkered with the settings on the television. I just could not remedy this. So now if I play Resident Evil 4 Remake, I just turn the HDR mode off, because there are certain sections where I can't actually see because the shadows are far too dark. Now, I did experience this again in Silent Hill 2 Remake, and this game doesn't actually give you the option to turn HDR mode off. And I'll give you an example. I'll put it on screen here. This is early on in the game. Don't worry, this is not a spoiler. I walk into this garage, and there's some lockers in the corner, and there's a car in the other corner, and I couldn't see them. They were just totally submerged in shadows. I'm not actually sure how you'll actually see this. I don't know whether it's my settings or my television, but I don't know whether you'll be able to see this car here or not. But I just thought I'd bring that up. If you have a problem with shadows in HDR mode, this game doesn't give you the option to turn HDR mode off. But I will mention that I did manage to remedy it. You can go into the settings and just turn the brightness up and stuff. But you may have to play the games. Like I said, if you have this problem, you may have to play the game at a slightly higher contrast than you want to. Especially when you consider this is a horror game, you may want to have it as dark as possible. I just thought I'd bring that up. It may not affect many people, but I just thought I'd bring it up in case it did. Just one other small thing I thought I'd bring up, just in case anybody was interested, is that if you're wanting to play this game with the graphics mode on as opposed to the performance mode, you're going to have a more advanced telly than I do. I'm very fortunate. Like I said, I have a proper 1080p gaming monitor. But when I switched to the graphics mode, the frames dropped so dramatically. Because my eyesight is now acclimated to playing at those higher frame rates with the PS5, it actually started to give me a headache. So I just thought I'd bring that up if you are wanting to play at the highest graphical fidelity, you're going to have a more advanced monitor than I do. So there it is, that's the review. I think I've included everything that I wanted to in the video. So what's my final verdict on Silent Hill 2 Remake? Well, to answer the question of, is Silent Hill 2 Remake a good remake? Well, I don't know. That's not a question that I can answer for you, because like I said in the intro, I've not played the original. But what I can say is, this is a standalone video game in its own right. Silent Hill 2 Remake is an excellent psychological survival horror video game. It has more than adequate combat, especially by the standards of survival horror, and an absolutely stunning storyline with some incredibly intriguing, some incredibly compelling characters. And if you're a fan of the survival horror genre, I do highly recommend this game. So just before I let you go, I just want to say a really big thank you for watching the video and listening to what I have to say. It's much appreciated. And if you do have 30 seconds spare, it would be really cool to hear any comments that any people have. You don't have to agree with me. Feel free to disagree with any of the topics or any of the opinions that I have in the video. All comments are very welcome. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.